Hey, what's up, Liron here. Today I want to talk to you about what I believe is the soul and heart of watercolor painting. Now, I'm going to bury the lead for a little bit and explain what I'm doing, and then we'll get to it. In the meantime, see if you can figure out what it is. Now, I did cut out a lot of the process. I wanted to just focus on the gist of it. I know cars don't really interest everyone, so that's fine. But I do think this is a great example of one of the core elements of the soul of watercolor painting. So I'm starting with the sketch here. The main kind of tricky part of this is the car is tilted ever so slightly to the right. You can see the tires on the left, very just a sliver, a thin slice of them. And so I'm trying to represent that. Didn't necessarily do the best job. The two lines representing the top of the car, one should be curved a little more, but that's fine. This correction, though, is very important. The moment I added that thickness height-wise to the left side, it put it in the right kind of structure. But a lot of these things can be fixed with watercolor and with the painting stage. So I'm starting with just throwing some water on the paper. Then I'm adding a bit of blue, adding a bit of purple, adding a bit of yellow, just a bunch of colors, where the idea is, just like I've shown you recently quite a bit, if you start very, very light, you get more time. It allows you to work things out, and it lets you do a lot of changes, which I absolutely love. Now, this is a very bright kind of green. Now, one thing I learned in terms of color mixing is I originally misjudged the color of the car. It's not really green as much as it is a turquoise teal. And you will see me making that correction later on, but it really shows how sometimes it's a challenge to mix these very bright colors, and either you need to rely on a convenience mixture or just not try and recreate them to the T, but find other creative ways to make the colors pop. So that's the one thing I kind of could have done maybe better. But in any case, a bit of wet and wet here. While the paint is still wet, I can add quite a bit of it. Change things around. Look at how much bead I'm getting, right? And I don't work top to bottom with a flat line preserving the bead. I'm working in different areas, but while I'm working on an area, I am preserving the bead. Now I'm coming back with some beautiful orangey yellow. It's more of a warm, really warm yellow. Just placing it in there, continuing with the green, but then transitioning onto the shadows. So look at this beautiful section. I really like this and enjoy it, because that's when the car turns from light to dark. That's the thing. When you look at the car, you immediately recognize it tells you the story of the car. If you look at car paintings by someone like Joseph Zbukvic, you will notice a lot of these things that happen is right there where it transitions from light to dark. You have the windshield and then the bottom part. Now it's time to stop burying the lead. The heart and soul of watercolor, to me, a big part of it at least, is the malleability. The fact that you can work with it while it's still wet, everything is sped up. Unlike oils where you'd let them dry over a night or over a couple of nights and see how the colors kind of shift and become glowy, with watercolor, everything happens faster, and that's what I love so much about it. So I can still make quite a lot of changes right now to most of the areas on the lower half. Now I'm adding these tires, the hint of tires, wet and wet with very thick paint. That's one kind of quick thing to remember the next time you're doing wet and wet, because I've seen this with a lot of my students. As soon as they start doing wet and wet, the mixing is not courageous enough to actually mix a dark enough color, and it ends up not showing or spreading out, not making any difference. You really need to come back with strong paint. Same goes for this. Now I'm doing wet and wet with opaque designer's gouache. And gouache is pretty much the same as watercolor, so I can work it the same way. This has been one of my favorite things to do. A lot of the cars where you see beautiful highlights melting, that's how I do it, or I'll spray water on it after the fact. But I love incorporating opaque paint into my watercolors, and especially when it comes to cars. It adds a lot of grace to it, and it's something that if you're used to just seeing pure watercolors, you may not be as used to. Now, a lot of people use opaque paint once the painting is dry, or once the paint is dry. I like to do it wet and wet. I think it looks fantastic. And I'm adding this sliver of, once again, it's very malleable. I can add that rich dark shadow under the car and really make one more distinction. I can darken these areas there in the center a bit more. Now, a lot of my colors are very free and kind of interpretive. Like the right side should be way more green, darker green. The left side as well, actually. But I took a very liberal approach with how I changed a lot of things here. One thing that does still bug me is the shape. The shape of the car could have been better, but that's fine. Now I'm starting to carve out these other dark shapes and areas with a bit of a bluish actually there, bluish black, adding some of these shadows that later on I can come back and add the mid values. And we're getting to a point where the car is almost complete. I mean, in terms of like the main wet and wet step, if you will, which is to me the hardest part, coolest part, most fun, and most significant part. The next part is the overall composition and how we're gonna make the car pop on this beautiful dark background. So I'm actually starting with yellows and warms, and then on top of that I'm adding some black, kind of neutral black, neutral tint, anything would work. I will put down below the link to the reference photo, sketch stage, and everything so that you can... I do have the sketch stage, I believe, so you can see the exact colors also I'm using. There will be a picture there with all the colors I'm using explained. The side of the track, I'm kind of adding that, you know, zigzaggy, not zigzag, but alternating reds and whites. And then onto the ground. The ground needs to be darker with a bit of wet and wet for the darkness to the sides. And then we'll truly darken the top half and make it feel like a part of the painting. But notice how most of the impact was done wet and wet on the car. This is very thick paint too, by the way. I do want to take a moment and mention that I am running a site-wide sale on the gallery. So if you ever wanted to get an original signed painting of mine, or you want to get it as a gift for someone, or you want to get a gift for yourself for Christmas, this is a great opportunity. 15% off of all orders, no matter how many paintings you purchase. So be sure to check that out. I added a lot of new paintings there too. If you haven't looked for a while, I added like 9 new paintings, I think. Something like that. 8, something like that. But in any case, yeah. Now I'm darkening that windshield. Again, another important trademark of a car. Again, if you've seen these simplified in a lot of impressionistic paintings, there is a strip of light for the top, then dark for the windshield, then light again for the top front, and then dark again for the part we're facing. This part right here under the headlights. And this kind of a format of light, dark, and dark shadow under everything reads really well as a car if you're looking to simplify. But look at what I'm doing here. Right now, we're starting to dive deeper into the details. So I'm adding these highlights, and around them, I'm adding slightly darker colors to bring more attention to the highlights. Could have gone a lot darker there, actually, but that's fine. And I'm adding all sorts of darks in random spots. Again, the thing that's going to carry this painting is everything we've done in the first half, where we did pretty much everything wet and wet and all the opaque designer's gouache. What we're doing now is modifications, kind of improvements. And then we're going to have some color improvements as well. But I think this is really at the heart of watercolor. It's that sense of freedom. You can do things very fast. You can add, change, modify, change the color, change the temperature, change the value, do a lot of things, lift, charge it back. You can just bring a bunch of water to the paper, see what happens. That's where the experimentation and the fun of it comes. And if there's anything that you take from this is to give all of these things a try. I'm spraying a bit of water there to keep things a little wetter for a while. That's where all the freedom comes. You'd be shocked at how many details can be achieved while the paint is still wet, and how a painting can be taken all the way to its completion in one go. And you will see this with another video I filmed of another car process that I did in one go. You'd be shocked at how much this can be achieved. And I didn't even really put a strong emphasis in here on getting the accurate colors, like, for example, the shadows on the ground feel a little cooler. I'm using warm, kind of gray, purpley, violet colors, because it really wasn't that important to me. It's more about that wet and making the most out of paint while it's still wet. And now we're going to improve that color, make it pop a little more, because it was lacking. So I'm using a convenience mixture. Any turquoise teal color will do. You'd have to test it out, but I swatched the color of the car in Photoshop, and I discovered it is really a teal kind of color rather than a bright green. When I was looking at it, I thought to myself, you know, a bright phthalo green. Now, of course, any color will work, because the colors don't really matter. It's what you make of them and how they work together. But I did want just that bit of color to resemble a bit more of the car, and that was my step towards getting there. And now all that's left is all these writings. I actually am very proud of this 17 number. The trick for me here was the thickness of lines. Every line that is horizontal, just very thin. Lines that are more vertical, thick. Small highlights that make a big difference. You know, the writing, the details. I should have added also some of the green highlights, but whatever. All of these things can be optimized. You can decide to take a break, revisit the painting, and add a bunch more, which is something I play around with in my mind to do sometimes. I look at an old painting, but maybe not too old, that I still really like, and think to myself, what can I do to improve it? And it's more fun, like fresh, fully fresh eyes. But in any case, just a couple of final touches. I'm adjusting the shape of that mirror there. The shape of that wing. I don't know what you'd call that. But I love these types of subjects, strongly contrasted, race cars, things of that nature. Any cars, pretty much, boring cars. As long as there's a strong contrast there, I can celebrate it and enjoy it as a painting. Now, one more passing of that teal color, because the other one wasn't enough. This time I actually mixed it with a bit of designer's gouache to make it more opaque. So the trade-off is more opaque paint, meaning a little lighter, like actual opaque value, darker, lighter value, but less on the saturation of the teal. And that was a trade-off I was willing to make. And you will see this in a few seconds. As I share the final scan with you, you'll see how big of a difference it actually made. And I think that it looks much, much better. Now, of course, if you can get everything in one go, that's the best. But the reality is sometimes I'll end up with a first wash that requires some modification. But here it is, the final result. Not the most, accurate drawing-wise and all of that, but I like it a lot. A lot of my cars, especially those for the 100 Cars Challenge, I traced. So the drawing is spot on. Here I didn't trace. I just kind of went fast with it. So it was a bit of a different experience. Again, this is a function of how accurate do you want it to be. If you care about it, feel free to trace. If you don't really care about it, or you want to just practice and learn how to not trace, do that. There is no right or wrong. There is no the correct way of doing it. It's more about the thing you're trying to get out of it. And honestly, if you just care about watercolor, you just want to paint something beautiful, you feel free to trace and skip all of that. But in case, I do want to thank you so much for watching. I will remind you once again, there is a gallery-wide sale, lirongallery.com. I will put a link below if you want to get a painting for yourself or someone else for Christmas. 15% off the entire thing. I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. These are a couple of strange years and times and months and weeks. And it's a lot of challenge. The market is not in a good place. So I'm very grateful for any support, and you get a painting for it, which is awesome. I do want to thank everyone who supports me over on Patreon, which is huge. Once again, thank you so much. If you want to receive credits at the end of the videos, be sure to check that out as well. And I'm super excited. I have a couple of other cool tutorials to share with you in the following days. I will see you in the next vid. Until next time, take care and keep creating. We'll talk to you soon.